Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter, from the piecing to the quilting and everything in between. And this week we are continuing with trying to use up all of our stash for the year, and we are going to create this really fun fall leaf block. So we are going to make a twist on a bear claw block is what we're going to use to create our fall leaf, and we're going to do it scrappy with a whole bunch of really fun fall colored fabrics. So we've got some reds, yellows, oranges, and greens, and we've cut these at varying widths. So you can really do anywhere from 3/4 of an inch wide is the smallest I would go. That's going to be a really thin strip, to about 1.5 to 2 inches is the largest that I went for these. And you need to make sure that you have some strips need to be at least 8 inches long so that they will go down the center of that square. And then you can do some that are a little bit smaller than that, down to about 4 inches is the smallest I would go, to make sure that you're getting some good coverage on your square. For our white fabric, we are going to need 2 squares that are 5.5 inches square. And then we will also need 2 that are 6.5 inches square. So we are using foundation blocks to put this together, and you're going to need 1 for the stem. You'll be able to find all of these in our subscriber library and print those off. So you'll need to print 1 for the stem, and then you will need to print 7 with the line just down the center, and these are going to be for our leaf. Okay, so as we're cutting these, I went ahead and I've got our fabric scrap. I folded it in 4ths just because I'm working in the smaller areas. It's just a little easier to work with. And as I mentioned, you can go as small as 3/4 of an inch for your strips, and that'll give you just a really small strip in your leaf. I'm actually going to go a little bit wider on this. I'm going to go about 7/8 of an inch for this one. And I'm just going to cut all the way down. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut another one. And I'm just really kind of eyeballing these measurements. They don't have to be exact. So this one is about 1.5 inches. And then we'll do another one that's just over an inch, about 1.25 inches. And now that I've got the strips cut, I'm going to actually just lay those strips on top of each other. And then we'll cut them so that they are at least 8 inches long, so that they will fit across our block, because we are sewing these on the diagonal of our block. So we want to make sure that we've got enough room. Oh, it looks like I didn't trim this one quite as well straight as I thought I had. So we actually have some pieces down here that are a little bit thinner. So you want to, like I mentioned, you want it to be at least 8 inches long. So I've been kind of cutting mine about 8.5 just to make sure I've got a little bit of extra in there. And then some of these shorter pieces, these are folded in half, can be used for the ends of the blocks. So the first thing we're going to do is cut our stem, and I went ahead and I've just cut the extra paper off around that. I'm going to take one of those 5.5 inch squares, and I'm going to just cut it in half on the diagonal. And then we're going to grab our stem piece. I need one of the ones that's a little bit longer. And we're going to just kind of place that over the top. And then we've got our white piece, so we're going to line up. Actually, we want to line it up this way, but we want to place it over the top to make sure it's going to fit that length. Line up our white piece along there and place that over. And then we're going to go ahead and just sew this on the machine. I'm going to throw a couple pins in here so it stays in place. Flip that over. Then we're just going to go ahead and sew on that line. Now that I've got that seam done, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a finger press right along here, and then we're going to place this one over the other side, and then again kind of flip that over, throw a couple of pins in, and sew along that seam to finish our stem. Now our stem piece is complete. We're going to go ahead, flip it over, and we're going to trim right on the paper along that outside line. So this is going to give us our our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we'll set that block aside. We're moving on to our leaf block. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut the piece that has just the one line down the middle. And then this one we're going to do where it's got white on one side, and then we're going to have our fabric stripes on the other side. So we're going to start off by taking that 6.5-inch square, and we're going to cut that in half on a diagonal. And then this is going to make up the white side of our seam. So we want to lay this on our square, but we want to make sure that we're only overlapping that 1/4 of an inch, because we're going to go ahead and sew that first seam right there on that line. So I'm just actually going to fold this in half and measure it out. Okay, we've got our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on there. So I'm going to throw a pin in there just to kind of help hold things in place so it doesn't move on us. And now we are ready to add our first strip. So make sure that you're adding the longer strips first, because you're going to need that. And as we get closer to the end, you can use some of those shorter strips from your stash. When you take that strip, we're going to line it up right along that white. And then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew right there on that line. Now that we've got our first one on, we're going to fold that over, and then this is where you really don't need to sew on the paper anymore for the rest of these. So we can fold that and set it aside. We're going to put our next strip on, and we're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam. The paper is nice just to make sure that you're making sure that these are going to be long enough all the way through. When we will sew our, like I mentioned, a 1/4 inch seam all the way down on this one. Now we've got our next one in place, and then we're going to go ahead and just continue adding strips and sewing that 1/4 inch seam until we have enough to cover our full block. We have all of our strips on here now, so we can go ahead, flip this over, and we're going to use this paper to go ahead and cut our square out. So again, just like what we did on the stem piece, we're going to cut it right on that line. And at this point, if you would like to, you can actually tear the paper off. You don't need it anymore. But this gives us our nice square piece. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat this 3 more times, so we've got a total of 4 squares that are half white and half striped. And then for our next one, this one, we still have that center line. So this one, you don't really have to make sure that you're sewing on the center necessarily. You can actually put a strip over and then the next one, but it's still giving us our foundation so that we end up with a perfectly square piece at the end. And this one, we're going to do strips all the way across. So the same way like what we did on the other one. You want to make sure that you've got one of your longer strips for the center. We're going to line that up. Like I said, you can line it up just right on that line, or a 1/4 of an inch on that line. I'm actually going to line it right on the line, and then I'll sew my 1/4 of an inch seam. And I'm going to grab my next strip. Give us a little thin one here. And then I'm going to take this to the machine, and I'm just going to sew that 1/4 of an inch seam down the length of that block. Now we have our first seam complete, and we did sew that onto the paper. Like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be on the line, but we did sew it to the paper. This is just going to help keep everything in place so that when we complete this block, it's going to be easier to trim that and get our perfectly square block. So now we're going to go ahead and just continue to repeat that process. And we're going to add another strip here, and then we're just going to continue until we complete this side of the square, and then we will do the same thing on the other side until we have a full square. So all of our squares are trimmed. We've removed the paper, and we are ready to lay out our leaves. So we're going to start with our stem. We're going to line everything else up.
Missy.
Now we've got all laid out. We can kind of, if we wanted to tweak a little bit, we could. If we wanted to flip these 2 blocks or something. Actually, I think I'm going to, because there's like, those 2 reds were like really close to each other. Oh, and now the greens are. Never mind. I'm not going to flip them anymore. But you can kind of change them up if you want to. And then we will go ahead and sew these together in the 3 rows. And then sew the 3 rows together. Now all our squares are sewn together and our leaf is complete. So we've got lots of really fun texture in here with using all of our scraps. You can use this block to create a full quilt. It would make really fun throw pillows for Thanksgiving or table runners or placemats. So make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell so that you're reminded every time we post a new video. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram so you can see what we're up to. And again, you can find the instructions and the templates for this leaf block in our subscriber library. And we'll see you next week.